Hello, everyone. Good day to everybody. Welcome to Virtual Concert Halls. And today, again, we have Katie Beardsworth introducing the next episode of Music Works. Hi, Katie. It's so good to
Hi,
see you. Good to
good
start
to
the week
see
with talking with you.
you. Absolutely, yeah, I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, this was a very interesting episode with Rebecca Hardwick. And she's talking about a really big transition which she made as an artist when the pandemic hit and all of our plans got scratched and changed. This is a very interesting journey of one artist, which we probably, a lot of us will find it ourselves in similar situation, don't you think?
I agree, absolutely. Rebecca kind of looked back at her professional work, did a lot of reflecting, and kind of came up with the idea to rework an existing project that she'd worked on before as a PhD, a doctorate proposal, and and was successful, and is now undertaking a doctorate at Guildhall in contemporary performance, which is to me just such an inspiring story of how people can rethink the what they want the most from their careers, and find a way through it. And obviously Rebecca, like all other performers, has had a really difficult year with so much work being cancelled, but I find this the way she's been able to look at her priorities in her career and rework them into such a success story to be really inspiring. So I hope that you agree too. So yeah, as we move to the episode, I hope you enjoy it. Welcome to episode 2 of season 2 of Music Works, the podcast that looks at the classical music industry. Last episode, we got some fascinating insights into the complex world of publishing rights and music royalties with Harriet Wybor of PRS for Music. Today, I'm talking to soprano Rebecca Hardwick about her work as a singer, exploring physical presence, presentation, and expression in contemporary music as a graduate student at the Guildhall School of Music and Drama, and why she has chosen to focus on Kurtag's Kafka Fragments. If you want to know more about performing as a singer, especially our contemporary repertoire, this episode is for you. And stay tuned to the end, where we'll be sharing more information about Becky, along with some great resources to help performing artists develop their careers. So let's go over to the Music Works studio, where Becky is waiting to talk to us about the challenges and highlights of her career as a classical soprano and her work on the contemporary repertoire from the point of view of an informed performer. Hi, Becky. It's great to have you here with us today.
Hello.
Welcome. So today I'm talking to soprano Rebecca Hardwick about her PhD topic as a graduate student at Guildhall, where she is studying for a doctorate in contemporary performance. Welcome, Becky. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
So having done the formal introduction, I should also say that Becky and I were friends at York University where we met.
Yes,
And
doing our undergraduate degree. Although
exactly.
Katie was, were you the year above me? Possibly.
Yes,
Yeah.
I think I was. Yeah.
Promoting interdisciplinary friendships there.
Exactly. It all feels way in the past to me anyway now. But yeah.
And
but
who would have thought we'd be here now?
Exactly. So I'm very excited to hear about your doctorate.
Thank you.
And we're here today to talk about that and to talk about, as ever, the impact of COVID on you and your career and on the arts in general. So where would you like to start?
Well, maybe a bit of context about how I kind of sort of ended up becoming a PhD candidate, which is something I thought I would never say if you'd read some of my essays at York.
That's not true, but okay.
Yeah, I had all the good intentions. Okay. Well, so basically, we had this amazing education at York, which was very, very liberal. And also very focused on different things. And while I was there, I discovered that I was really interested in contemporary classical music, which was something that I had completely disregarded before then because I was a chorister and thought I just liked, Mozart and choral music. And then I ended up doing a master's at the Royal College of Music, so I had some really sort of intense formal vocal training there, and then sort of went into a performing career. I worked at Opera Holland Park. I became an apprentice with the Monteverdi Choir, so loads of different kind of very traditional operatic and classical music threads towards performance. In 2019, I made my Royal Opera debut, which was amazing, in The Marriage of Figaro, playing first bridesmaid. And then sort of COVID happened. And everything's on a halt at the moment. But one of my main artistic things that I've been doing for the past, I would say 10 years, is with a group called the Vocal Constructivists. In fact, it is 10 years because this year is our 10-year anniversary. And I was a founding member. And the Vocal Constructivists, I can talk more about that later, but it's a kind of a liberal arts collective of lots of different people from different disciplines. And we work exclusively with graphic notation and extended sort of compositional writing techniques. And I sort of from that, I decided that I wanted to focus on my own strand of approaching ways in which you can perform contemporary classical music. And because of my formal training and my sort of nerdy tendencies, I decided that I wanted to particularly approach music that's considered to be quite vocally difficult, purely because I find it very interesting, and I just enjoy the fact that it's quite difficult to learn and very rewarding to then perform. And then that led me to Kafka Fragments, which is what I'm doing my PhD on. And it's a piece by Kurtag for soprano and violin. And I started the project at Aldeburgh as a sort of residency there. They have creative residencies for anybody. It's really, really cool. They have this very, very creative environment where they just kind of give you the resources that you need and they let you get on with it and experiment with what you want to do, which is what I did. And then eventually that sort of ended up as a PhD. So there you go. That's how I got to being a student at the Guildhall.
Well, I mean, I think that's just fascinating. It's so interesting, isn't it, to look back over sort of initial student life and then where it takes you into, over the last, is it about 10 years since we graduated from?
Yeah, I guess so. It would be 11 years this summer because I graduated in 2010.
Yes. so 12 years for me. And I mean, you very neatly and modestly just skimmed over the part at which that became a PhD.
I know. Well, I thought that in itself is quite a lot of words to say. So I thought I would, I did a brief skim, but I can elaborate.
I think you should, because I actually think this is a brilliant story.
Okay.
So yes, do tell me
sure.
how this became a PhD.
Well, so as I mentioned, I went to Aldeburgh, and you basically you can apply as an artist in kind of any form. I will go into more detail about the other people that were on this residency if you like, because I felt very, very sort of stranded being the only sort of person that was doing this very hardcore, difficult classical music. So I started working on the piece with this violinist called Maya Kaddish, and we applied to go to Aldeburgh, and they give you a week-long residency where you can explore what you want to do. And what I wanted to do was to look into how classical contemporary repertoire can be presented and performed, rather than sort of being staged or kind of being lumped into calling it an opera. And because Kurtag's Kafka Fragments is based on Kafka's diaries and letters, extracts from those, and there's just like a complete wealth of stuff, and the way that Kurtag writes is very concise, very specific, and so to me it doesn't make sense to kind of turn that into an opera and give it an extra narrative of saying this is about this is about this. I really wanted to like get into the core raw kind of subject matter of what was there, from a musicological point of view as well as a sort of creative one. So I thought I could do all of that in a week. Couldn't. But what we did do is there's 4 parts to Kafka Fragments, and we worked on the first part, which is actually only 15 minutes worth of music, but we managed to sort of delve into that over a week and kind of look into ways in which physicality kind of comes out of fully embodying the music and working on ways in which you can present that sort of physically. And by the end of the week, I mean, we presented what we'd done, and we also worked on a piece by another composer called Ollie Brignall for soprano and violin called Junk Lectures, which tied in really well with sort of aspects of Kurtag that were in Kafka. The aspects of Kafka that are in Kafka Fragments. And so after that, basically, I sort of forgot about it for a while, and I knew that I wanted to do something with it. I knew that I needed more time than a week, but I wasn't sure. So that was actually in 2018. And then last March, or I think it was probably February. So when the pandemic hit, I just got back from America. I've been on tour with the Monteverdi Choir, and all of a sudden, all of our work just sort of disappeared overnight, basically. We were meant to be going to Munich the following week. We had this massive Beethoven tour throughout the year, loads of exciting stuff. And it just, obviously everything got cancelled. So I was in my bedroom in Camden thinking, oh my goodness, like, what am I going to do? I need a creative outlet. And so I just turned back to Kurtag and to Kafka, and started reading around the topic. And the more I read, the more I realised that actually it was quite an extensive project, and maybe I could do a PhD about it. But as a performer, I wouldn't have described myself as an academic, and so I would never have thought of doing something like a PhD. But then, after having done a bit of research, I discovered that the Guildhall offer performance PhDs, which is something that I hadn't really heard of, because if you think of doing a doctorate, you think of, just writing a huge tome. I remember my dad vividly when I was a teenager, my mum proofreading his massive PhD every single night. So that's what I think of when I think of PhD. And then I discovered that they do this performance PhD, and I thought, wow, maybe I could do that. And then I still don't really know how I managed to do it in the midst of feeling like the world was crumbling around during the pandemic. I just decided to just write a proposal, see how it went. And I got accepted onto the course, which was amazing. And so I can definitely see, how it can span over 4 years rather than 1 week.
Yes, sounds
so there
like
you go.
That's
Yeah.
amazing. I would just think it's, you know, I'm kind of always seeking positive stories within reason, you know, to come out of what's
Absolutely.
happened.
And one thing that I really struggled with when all my work was cancelled was the feeling of still being an artist, because suddenly I was like, well, I'm not performing, you know, aside from church, which is, you know, is such a literal godsend. But um, yeah, so just this idea that I just didn't feel like an artist, and I was like, how can I like create something that means something to me and it helps me develop my own sort of performance skills and my knowledge, and you know also to kind of carry on connecting with the wide world in which, you know, we were no longer sort of part of when you're stuck at home all the time. And that's how it formulated.
Yeah, absolutely. And career progression as well, I'm guessing, because that's the thing
Yeah.
when you're, it's all the different, I mean, you know, people talk about early career and mid-career, and it's never an ideal time to take a
What does
break.
that
But it's,
mean?
well, exactly. At the
Yeah.
moment, it means very little, unfortunately.
I feel like I'm on like a work sabbatical.
Yeah. No,
Or something.
absolutely, and I do think
Yeah.
that you know, having that creative and productive outlet, that not only is, I mean, creativeness is important in itself, but to have that it meaning something towards your future as well is just such a brilliant thing to come
Yeah,
out of this, you know.
absolutely. And what I would say as well, especially in terms of contemporary vocal music and well, just contemporary music in general, is that it's something that I've always had this like deep interest in since we did our undergrad. Just because it's like when you discover anything new, you sort of think, oh, that's cool. And then the more you look into it, you're like, oh my God, this is fantastic. You know, there's so much there. And it's all, you know, it's new and there's always stuff being written. And, you know, so it's something that really interested me. But then having done formal vocal training at the Royal College of Music and things like that, you're focusing on Mozart and opera and things like that. And I was lucky enough to do a contemporary opera while I was at the Royal College. But then, you know, there's loads of very, very abstract and sort of very modern music that, you know, just you don't have time to study. And then as soon as you start working, I just sort of, you know, especially the way that I went down, I was doing very traditional like Puccini operas at Holland Park, and I was doing, you know, I did Mozart, I'd done, you know, all that kind of stuff. So to have that time to really step back and think, what do I want to focus on? As you know, as lucky as I am to sort of be doing all of this traditional repertoire, where do my passions lie, and how can I follow that? And it's just amazing that the Guildhall has this you know doctoral program which is performance, because for me, I don't really know where else I would do that. Sort of study this kind of repertoire that I want to study, you know, including things like Stockhausen and Pauline Oliveros and, you know, all this kind of stuff. So it's really lucky that that they have that course. Good for them.
Absolutely. And it's still so difficult to find a really rich and varied kind of range of contemporary music performance, both as a performer and as a listener, I think. Would you agree?
Well, I think it's changing. It's going more towards supporting contemporary music. I mean, if you look at the Royal Opera House, they've done tons of really interesting, including ballet as well, but things like the George Benjamin operas that they've had there, and the Addas as well, which are, you know, kind of very complex writing. And that, you know, and then there's things like Philip Glass, which is more accessible, sort of minimalism, and John Adams. But I think there's more appetite for it, I think. And I'm really happy that they're coming, like works like that are coming into the canon. And Kafka Fragments has actually been staged at the Limbury Theatre in the Royal Opera House before by Peter Sellers. But that's something that I'm looking at, because I'd rather kind of stage it in a way that's not an opera, if you see what I mean.
Absolutely.
But I think that yeah, the appetite for contemporary music is growing, I think, and there's amazing fringe companies like Tete Opera. They do fantastic work. They've got tons of composers writing for them, and they had this amazing. Actually, I was tuning into it while I was working last year. I did some work in Norway, and and they basically, you paid back about £5 to watch these new operas on their website. It was brilliant, and I watched some really interesting sort of operas during that time by composers that were new to me, and I connected with on social media, and like had chats about what they thought about staging and all that stuff. So it is there. You've just got to kind of like, you know, support it and, you know, look out for it and connect with the people that are doing it.
Absolutely. And I think that's such a fascinating thing about working with composers that are living, is that you can talk to them and you know, you can learn more about what they do, and that, you know, the work is still living and still you know, I was going to say in progress. I don't mean to sound unfinished, but you know, it's like you know.
Well, I think like malleable, like, you know,
yes.
open for change. And one thing about Kurtag is that he was always revising and editing his works, and he'd often retract them because he wasn't happy. I think he is particularly kind of particularly particular about what he wants to be kind of, you know, out there in the general public. So which is kind of great from my perspective, because it means that every single thing that he writes, you know, is completely intentional. And so you know that, so there's kind of, whatever you're working on, you know that it's got meaning behind it, which helps when you're trying to sort of glean your own interpretation from it.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice thing, isn't it? Especially when you're working with something complex, to know, you know, that you can really trust what's written down, and that
it's not gratuitous in any way. It's very specific and very, you know, detailed for a reason. Yeah.
So, what would you say if you needed to explain to someone who wasn't particularly sold on contemporary music, why should they listen to the Kafka Fragments?
Well, Kafka Fragments because it's amazing.
What more reason do you need?
Kafka Fragments because it is amazing. It draws on you know, Kafka, which is, you know, one of the literary giants of its ever, you know, and Kurtag, as I said, because he's got so much integrity to what he writes, and basically when he was writing it, there was quite a big impression of Hungarian nationalism going on in sort of the 80s during the Cold War. So actually, when he was writing, it was really him sort of fighting against that system and saying, like, this is how I want to write, this is how I write. And, you know, it didn't actually get very far because of the sort of like borders around Hungary at the time. So I think the world should know more about Kurtag, but they don't because of all this historical context. So, I mean, he compared to lots of other composers, he is fairly well known, but just I don't think on the scale that he should be. And so that's a personal reason why I'm doing it. But the other thing I would say generally about contemporary music is that the thing is, a lot of it just isn't actually that contemporary anymore.
Well, oh, absolutely.
You know, so when basically in 2015, I went and studied at the Stockhausen Foundation in Curtin in Germany, and with my friend George Chambers, and we studied this piece by Stockhausen called "In the Sky I'm Walking," and it was written in 1974, or between 1973 and 1974, and actually, if you're thinking about it, if you think about pop music from that time, obviously, like the scale of pop music is a lot shorter, but I was thinking, like, this really isn't that modern anymore, and it's considered to be contemporary music. And I think people kind of have this sort of thought that it's really modern, and it's not, you know. So I think it's really important that we learn more about it, because all of a sudden there's going to be some other kind of genre of music that becomes more you know, relevant to the now than contemporary music in inverted commas is. So, you know, I think, and there's just so much there that, you know, so much good stuff that maybe was not considered worthy at the time because it was too out there or too abstract or whatever. But I think a lot of that stuff's having a renaissance. Like, so much Stockhausen is being done at the Barbican now that was completely like written off at the time. I mean, not just the Barbican, obviously. Just thinking of that as an example.
Of course.
So
that's really interesting, because I have also heard that I mean, to refer to contemporary classical music as just one genre even is kind of bonkers when you think about it, because it's so incredibly broad and it could literally be anything, and some of it you know, you could listen to two pieces of contemporary music and they could have pretty
Absolutely.
much literally nothing in common at all.
Yeah.
And I think something that's interesting about it is that for some reason contemporary classical music has a reputation for being atonal still. I think it's potentially
Yeah.
waning now, but
Yeah.
there is still loads of audience. I say this as a promoter who think that if it's contemporary, it's not going to be that enjoyable to listen to. It's not going to be that easy on the ear, and that just could not be more untrue or
I agree.
more irrelevant to such an enormous part of that period, if not genre.
Yeah, I think with people like Philip Glass and John Adams, who they've had loads of success recently, especially Philip Glass at the English National Opera. Those kind of operas, they sound good and people really respond to them because they're, if that's a thing, but they're not atonal, and they kind of offer this really kind of almost meditative sort of, I hate the word sound world, but I'm going to use it, sound world. And also I think just as a visual spectacle as well, that just the pure kind of artistry and theatre behind it, I think is really cool. And one thing I would say about John Adams in his take on minimalism is so I recently watched Dr. Atomic from the Metropolitan Opera, and it's the way that he uses minimalism to kind of create this feeling of urgency. So Dr. Atomic is about the first testing of the first atomic bomb, and there's also Nixon in China, which Scottish Opera did last year, which is about Nixon going to China. And so he kind of uses these political American history things and creates this sense of urgency using minimalism. And it's kind of similar. It's got this kind of like cinematic feel to it because it's these like big political stories. There's lots of urgency behind it, and it's something that people can relate to. Like, that I'm sure that audiences would remember these times in history. Or at least like learnt about them at school. So I think there's ways in which contemporary music has been made really accessible, and the use of music to kind of make it to kind of reflect what is going on stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And you just said it, and I actually just made a note to talk about relevance of topics. So then you said because this is the thing: if you don't listen to contemporary opera, for example, then you're going to think all operas are about Greek gods or servants doing hilarious things
or dodgy sexism.
Yeah, exactly, because you can't have like subject matter and language and the way we talk about women and society and everything is always developing. Any minorities, not just women, although in opera definitely women.
Well, I would say, with feminism, that's a huge strand in opera, and there are ways in which you can make traditional opera more feminist, and you can draw things out which kind of celebrate the female characters. However, they are still seeped in these kind of like sexist kind of patriarchal structures just because of like when their time frame of when they were written, and so I think it's really important to be able to write things which are relevant now, and that just have like completely dispose of that kind of all of the typical frameworks that you might kind of imagine opera to be in.
Yeah, it's nice to be able to. I do a lot of thinking about this because I sometimes wonder, like I sometimes watch old TV shows and I just can't enjoy them because I just find the level of just the patriarchal. And it's not in the time when it bothers me the most is when it's not part of the story at all, and it's not remotely relevant, and it's just there.
Latent
like obviously
sexism,
and I just find it really kind of difficult to watch things. I was watching an old comedy film the other night, and I had to turn it off because I was like, I just don't find it funny because it's just not.
Was it a Carry On film? Because I'm pretty sure
it wasn't. But no, I did think of this when I said it as well. And I do a lot of things. I kind of don't want the history of comedy and the history of music and the history of so on and so forth to be lost because we're all more enlightened about how these things make us feel.
Absolutely.
But on the other hand, I do feel that, and it does genuinely get in the way of my enjoyment of certain things. And one thing that I suppose I've thought about is the fact that we have to acknowledge this as part of our history and part of how the world is, and part of getting to where we are now. But if classical music is only broadly listened to by in its historical form before,
Yeah.
before this century and so on, then that will never happen to classical music, and it will always be an archaic form of entertainment. Because as you say, there is only so much you can do with the plot of an opera to, flip the genders, or do it in a different kind of context that addresses some of the problems, but you can't ultimately remove that historical context, and potentially neither should you. It's just that these things have to kind of move on and move forward.
I kind of feel in a similar way about academia, because it is, like I said, like I never thought I'd do a PhD, and I kind of like made all these assumptions about academia being like largely men, or kind of like stuffy, kind of like ancient or like old kind of like research into really old topics, and like finding all this like new old stuff, which is completely like just a complete assumption on my part. And then but one of the best things about doing my PhD now is that it's just not like that at all. It's fantastic. And my course is run by women, which is really interesting. And it's like kind of rewriting in my own head like what I all these assumptions that I made about it. And a lot of the books I've been reading, just kind of like finding my own place as a woman and as a performer, to kind of like share my experience with a new kind of generation of other people and singers who are interested in contemporary classical music.
Absolutely.
Sounds like I'm going to take over the world, but
I think you are, though. I think that's fair.
No, I think it's just making your own mark in the industry in which you want to is very important. If you've got something to say about it, and especially
very important. When it's a form of thought leadership.
Oh, that's nice. I'm going to make a note of that. Thought leadership.
Absolutely, as a thought leader.
Yeah. I mean, but like it's still difficult. Like anyone who's like thinking about doing a PhD, it's definitely still quite hard. Like it's not easy, and I'm having to relearn how to like use all these skills that I had when I was an undergrad, just about, and kind of remember how to do it. And one of the most interesting things is that because I've been a performer, I mean, God knows, probably my whole life, professionally for about 10 years, and if somebody gives me critical feedback about my singing, absolutely fine with that, like no problem. I can basically take any criticism. As soon as I send off my writing for someone to read, I'm panicking, I'm worrying, I'm thinking like, oh my goodness, like what did I write? Does it read really badly? Like what? And so it's a real like learning curve for like relearning a new skill and translating your like core skills, and mine is performing, into something else which makes it useful for other people. And it's very much a work in progress.
I think that's really interesting, because I feel the same about certain things. I feel like we can probably all relate to feeling competent in one area and then doing something that's not within that framework, and suddenly kind of almost going back to square one in terms of like, oh, is this going to be criticised? Do I fit in with how this is normally done? And so
I know, because like I have so much confidence as an adult, but then I'll write something about Kurtag and Kafka, and I'll be like, oh my god, like is it right? I don't know. And but it's really interesting. It's like I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, that's great. It sounds like a good it's skills beyond writing, isn't it? It's the whole life skills.
Yeah.
And I think it's really truly inspirational, because as you said, you weren't planning on making it into a PhD, and
I think that's probably the best way to do it, though. I think well, I read something that this is absolutely no disrespect to anyone who did do this, but I read something where they kind of advise you not to do your undergrad, your postgrad, and then your PhD all in one go, because there's no way I could have written this PhD if I'd done it straight after my master's, because I hadn't done all the stuff that I'm writing about. So having that kind of career behind me and all the different like multitude of different kind of strands of performance that I've done, you know, over that time, you know, from traditional opera to really liberal collective art stuff for both constructivists to touring with the Monteverdi choir, learning about Baroque opera, all these different contexts, even singing in my church choir. All these different contexts inform how you go forward with your own art and what your interests are. And it's really important to, I think, well, especially for me, but I would advise people to be as worldly as possible and explore every, you know, different type of performance and in different types of classical music that you can, because everything informs each other. And there's such a massive link between Bach and Kurtag that I'm so pleased that I've studied so much Bach with John O'Lake Gardner and recorded loads of Bach and all that stuff. So, you know, I think being as open-minded as possible just makes you the best artist that you can be.
Absolutely. And you need time and sort of, you know, learning time with your instrument, with your voice, and time to, you know, to literally experience all these things, don't you?
Yeah.
And I just I would love to know, do you have any advice if there's anyone listening to this who is thinking, oh, I did this thing and I wonder if it'd make a good PhD, or, you know, anything like that? Do you have any advice?
Well, if you specifically want to make it a PhD, my advice would be to read around the topic as much as you can. And even if you know, with something like Kurtag, there's actually not that much written about him. So even if what you want to study, there's not much written about that, read everything around it that you can, that you get your hands on. So like, you know, if it's about performance or musicology or like different areas, even like the social, political context and stuff like that, and talk to as many people as you can. I had some really good support from a friend of mine called Jane Alden, who she actually founded Vocal Constructivists, and she's a professor in America. And I was so nervous about talking to her about it because I was like, she thinks I'm a performer and I know I want to be an academic, you know. But if you just kind of get rid of all that anxiety and just go and talk to people, my experience is that they're just incredibly supportive. And so just basically read as much as you can, talk to people, and basically try and work out why what you want to do is original and why you're doing it and who is it for. I think if you answer those questions first, that's quite a good place to start.
Oh, that's excellent advice. Completely agree. And if I can just add something, I think what you've done, which you haven't mentioned, is that you've just had to, whether consciously or not, address a kind of view that you hold about yourself as not being an academic, and then and just, you know, throw that out the window and, you know, allow other people to see it too.
Oh, it's because of all the stigma that I mentioned about being an academic. You know, maybe I'm just making massive assumptions, but that's what I thought about it, and maybe other people do too. So I don't know, but because from my point of view, I'm not doing it because I want to be an academic. I'm doing it because I want to know more about the world through music. And if you can draw, I'm drawing on Kafka, which is completely amazing writing, and it you know, illuminates so much about the human condition. And Kurtag, who is commendable for the way that he writes, and, you know, his attention to detail and his commitment to writing amazing music. And then, you know, to the voice and the violin, which, you know, are just really communicative ways to present music. So, you know, that's why I'm doing it. I don't kind of want to be an academic, but I do want to learn about the world through music. And that's why it's important.
Interesting. A whole other podcast topic of what is an academic and how is that different from what you just said.
That is the most academic thing I've ever heard. What is an academic? What is an academic? I feel like I might have a lecture on that next week.
might write a little essay about that. Oh, wow, what a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. We've explored some areas today that don't often get the on-air discussion they deserve. Thank you so much for joining us, Becky, and sharing your journey as a singer into your PhD subject, as well as some fantastic insights on contemporary performance, as well as opera as social commentary, and how that does, and all too frequently doesn't, reflect current thinking on issues such as sexism. Amazing. You can find out more about Becky and her work on her website, RebeccaHardwick.com. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Music Works podcast. If you've enjoyed this conversation, please subscribe, check out our other great episodes, and even better, leave us a review. You can also sign up to our mailing list at www.polyphonyarts.com/mailing-list for updates and news about what Polyphony Arts is up to for all you classical music folk out there. You can find more information in the show notes. Meanwhile, I'm Katie Beardsworth, and I look forward to sharing with you the next great episode of Music Works.